委員，
Members.
早晨咁多位委員，我
Morning. We have a quorum and it is the appointed time for the meeting, so let me call the meeting to order. Members, please note the papers issued since the last meeting. It is a referral from the Public Complaints Office on policy issues relating to providing support for families and children in poverty. Items for discussion at the next meeting, please go to the list of outstanding items of discussion and also the list of follow-up actions. The next meeting will be held on the 13th of January in the new year. It's Monday at 10:45 in this room. I'd like to ask members whether you agree to taking up the following items, including planning for the provision of welfare facilities in new districts and progress of the pilot scheme on home care and support for elderly persons with mild impairment. Now let us go into the items for discussion of the meeting. Briefing on the proposed members' bill to amend the Protection of Children and Juveniles Ordinance, Cap 213, and the Juvenile Offenders Ordinance, Cap 226. We have a paper, and that is a letter dated the 22nd of October from Dr. Fernando Zhang, requesting the panel to discuss protection of children's rights through legislation and his proposed amendments to the Protection of Children and Juveniles Ordinance, Cap 213, and the Juvenile Offenders Ordinance, Cap 226. It is a legislative proposal, and every legislator, therefore, has been invited to take part in the discussion. As you know, the administration representatives are in the meeting room. We welcome the administration team. Since this item is raised by Dr. Fernando Zhang, we'll give the floor to Dr. Fernando Zhang to take us through the paper. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce this private members' bill at the Welfare Services panel. The DOJ has already issued a certificate, and that is a certificate issued by the law draftsman. And after today, we can propose the bill to the President for a ruling. As you know, the country, society, families, and individuals all have the responsibility to protect children from violence, negligence, or inhuman treatment. Under our basic law, Bill of Human Rights Ordinance, and also the UN Convention on Children, of which Hong Kong is a signatory and a member. Well, under all these, we have promised to implement the Convention on the Right of the Child. This private members' bill seeks to implement the UN Right of the Child Convention. In essence, we are going to propose amendments to the Protection of Children and Juveniles Ordinance, Cap 213, and the Juvenile Offenders Ordinance, Cap 226, in order to bring out a few amendments. In my paper, now, of course, I have given you the bill itself. And also, there is a summary, and I will only use a short while, hopefully, to let you know the gist of the proposed amendments. We will give effect to Article 20 of the Hong Kong Bill of Rights, and also further give effect to Articles 3 and 20 of the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child of 1989, and also provide protection for children from child abuse and neglect. And there are a few parts to this bill, apart from a few crucial definitions. We are also going to introduce a few things. Number one, the new provision will provide that a court and the Director of Social Welfare are required to have regard to the best interests of the child as the paramount consideration when exercising powers under that ordinance. This is what we should do in spirit, but then specifically in law, we don't have any express provision under these two main ordinances. And my private bill will specifically write out what are the best interests of the child, and there is a checklist for it within the bill. We have to consider delays would affect the interests of the child, and also the court should consider children who are living under the same roof or who are relatives. Perhaps I can illustrate this a bit further. Say, for example, if there is a family of a history of domestic violence and child abuse, and there may be 3 brothers who have been abused. And in fact, I tackled such a case, 3 brothers. One was very small. All 3 were abused. With the arrangement of the Social Welfare Department, the court dealt with the cases one by one. In the end, the 3 children were sent to different respite dwellings. Anyone would think that this is unsatisfactory, but in law there is no provision to prevent that from happening. My bill, if you look at 4A to N, you will see that one of those will say that we have to consider the integrity of the children concerned and the family concerned, and also their emotional network. And my bill, therefore, asks the court and the DSW to consider whether 3 brothers or siblings should be sent to different places in case of domestic violence. This is how I seek to implement the best interests of a child. Can I please continue? Yes, please. Sorry. I will be as concise as possible. Say in certain cases, when the order of protection has expired, there is no follow-up, and the court has no power to require that case to be submitted to the court for examination again until the protection order has expired. This bill requires a review of the care plan of children who have remained in institutional care or in the custody of the DSW for more than 9 months within the preceding year. Then the relevant authority must submit the care plan for the child to the court again for review, so that these children who are arranged to live away from their families will have their cases reviewed on a regular basis. We believe these 2 points are extremely important for the children concerned. And also, the bill will allow certain professionals like social workers, teachers, and medical practitioners, and will grant them standing to bring care or protection proceedings. And I'm talking about like protection orders, because right now only the police and social workers of the SWD can apply for such proceedings. This bill will empower other professionals who also deal with children the standing to apply for the protection order. The importance of this is that we can deal with urgent cases. We understand that if we are dealing with child abuse cases now, we need to conduct a multidisciplinary case meeting. We just like to expand the pool of professionals. This is what is done in other places. And then the bill allows the court a particular power when the court is of the view that more flexibility or more power is required, then the court can transfer the proceedings to a higher court. Say a magistrate's court can transfer the case to a district court, which can transfer cases to the court of first instance. This bill also creates a new statutory duty to report child abuse. Right now, about child abuse reports, right now there are no legislative requirements. If you are aware, Chairman, the Ombudsman also wrote a report recently, the conclusion of which is a mandatory report mechanism. My bill stipulates that those who are responsible for the care and welfare of children will have this duty to report child abuse. And the abuse report target will be SWD or the police. I'm just writing out the principle. I have not written in penalties or a time frame, but we think the principle is important. The requirement will be placed on those who are directly responsible for the care of children. Then, if an employee of a certain organization has reported child abuse, but then if that employee is discriminated against, for example, the employee may be dismissed or debarred from promotion, we have included a penalty because it is a criminal offense. We like to introduce this so that professionals under the employment of certain organizations have nothing to fear if they report child abuse cases. They should not have to face retaliation. The bill also bans corporal punishment. But we do not include light or punishment that do not last for long. However, if it is battery or assault against a child, the law would say that there is no defense of reasonable chastisement in case of serious assault or battery of a child. Lastly, with regard to criminal responsibility, we are going to introduce a new standard. At present, juveniles under the age of 10 are exempt from any criminal liability. It is as simple as that. But actually, the UN has proposed to raise the age to 14. And anyone under the age of 18 should not be penalized like adults, and those who are under 14 should not be imprisoned. This is the proposal of the UN. My bill is not going that far. I'm only introducing 3 standards for the age of criminal responsibility. As I said, anyone under 10 should be exempt from criminal liability. But between 10 and 16, I have introduced a concept. Now, unless it is serious bodily harm that has been imposed, otherwise, that child should not be subject to criminal liability. But as for children between the age of 16 and 18, they should not be tried summarily. Anyone under the age of 18 should not be sent to prison for more than 10 years. So this is my simple introduction to the bill. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zhang. After we received your proposal to discuss the bill, Dr. Zhang, we know that the background is that there is no mechanism to mandate the reporting of child abuse. But this time around, we may be able to take that half step. Today, we have the Assistant Director of Social Welfare, Ms. Pang Kit Ling, here with us, and we will allow members to ask questions soon. Perhaps, Dr. Zhang, you need to help answer questions. Let us see whether any members would like to ask questions on the draft of the bill? Anyone?
會唔會睇睇政府嗰個先講先好冇啊？係啊。
Would the could you perhaps ask administration to speak? Well, yes, this could be done. Do you have any responses you would like to give on the private bill? Thank you, Chairman. Well, I cannot really speak on behalf of the legal sector because that is the responsibility of the DOJ. But in some of the amendment proposals involve some of the services we provide. Perhaps I could speak on that. First of all, on children's best interest, we always uphold this principle in handling with all cases related to children. So whether it be general social welfare issues or domestic violence cases, we would consider the child's best interest at all times. You mentioned that perhaps children would be sent into temporary homes and siblings may need to be housed separately. Well, this depends on the individual cases because right now we consider what kind of services would best suit children of different age groups. Sometimes there may be special needs even within siblings, and we must consider the service providers. Well, usually we hope to keep families together. We try our best to take care of siblings under the same roof. However, it may not be feasible. And therefore, in cases of urgency, for example, on family, domestic violence, even if we're not able to house siblings together under the same roof, we try to seek for them a probability to be housed under the same roof even afterwards. So this has always been a principle we try to uphold. For children who are under protection of Children and Juveniles Ordinance Cap 213, and we need to follow up on a protection order, the court will require us to submit a progress report on a certain date, and the court will decide on that date. Each case is different. Some cases may be handled at an earlier date, and they might have to wait for 6 months or 9 months for us to submit a progress report, and they may require us to submit it earlier. Well, other than the Ombudsman giving us comments, we see that in the no protection order, we see that there has not yet been a perspective on whether there should be a statutory reporting, and so we would need to continue with consultation to see whether the public or the sector will have any views on that. we still need to further explore this issue as to what age can be charged with offense. Well, I'm sorry, I cannot give any response on that. Mr. Oh Chong Sing. Oh no, I do not wish to speak. Well, let us see if any members have questions. I'm sure that Ms. Pang will try her best to answer questions, and Dr. Fernando Cheung as well. Any questions? Well, if you do not have questions, perhaps I could ask one first. I'd like to thank Dr. Cheung for working on the presentation of this bill. This is not an easy path. Hong Kong does not yet have a mandatory reporting mechanism on child abuse cases. I think we are very far behind because in the United States and Canada, when there are any suspicious cases, then it could be reported. In Hong Kong, I'm sure that there are still many undisclosed cases. You may remember what happened a couple years back with Lam Lam, and this gave rise to the exploring of this proposal. Perhaps Ms. Pang and Dr. Cheung can help us with this. Let's say if we are going to set up a mandatory reporting mechanism, what would be the best format? I want to see how the administration looks at it. We all understand that we are now working on a bill presentation by member. Well, the government may think that right now our current mechanism is adequate. However, this is a breakthrough. Perhaps the administration can discuss with Dr. Fernando Cheung what could be done to at least know about the inadequacies right now and how we can make improvements. Dr. Cheung, please. Recently, the Ombudsman report pointed out that the SWD and the Education Bureau do not agree exactly on the handling method. I think they should first make it consistent. However, in the past, we did encounter many challenges in this mechanism. Sometimes kindergarten teachers express their suspicions to the principals of schools, yet the principals do not follow up, and that would lead to dire consequences. We have also seen some cases being reported to the SWD, yet the SWD thought that it was only an inquiry. In 2006, the United Nations report already stipulated that Hong Kong should set up a mechanism on mandatory reporting. Our chairman, as you said earlier, many other countries are already doing that. There are some differences between the countries. For some countries, it's a bit mild. They only have such a requirement, which is similar to what I have presented in my bill. Some are a bit more strict and rigid that there must be a reporting made within 24 hours. Otherwise, it would become a criminal offense. And so the responsibility will lie with the caretaker, such as the parents or guardians. I included in principle. I hope that the law will understand that this is only what I put down in principle. Well, the deputy chair would also like to ask a question, but then I want everyone on TV to also know that Dr. Fernando Cheung is now presenting a bill under Article 74 of the Basic Law to try to provide better protection to children and juveniles. And Dr. Fernando Cheung has been introducing us to his bill, and we are here today to discuss with the administration and what can be done going forward. This is not a debate. We are just trying to work out how we can work in the better interest of children. Mr. Siu Ka, Leung Yiu-zhong, and one other member would like to speak. Perhaps I would let members speak for 4 minutes first, and then perhaps Ms. Pang can answer all the questions together. Mr. Siu Ka-jun, thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Fernando Cheung's presentation of the bill. We have discussed some of the items in this bill, but in the past it was only more of an administrative procedure, or sometimes they have been delayed, and so we want amendments made to ensure that the government will take it more seriously. I think that the administration has sort of forced us into making this formal. I have some questions actually for Dr. Cheung. There is a part about reviewing services for children, and also on questions about DOJ, but no one from DOJ is present today, so some of these answers cannot be answered. I think there are some other questions that cannot be answered by the SWT as well. For example, on the juvenile offenders in the Correctional Services Department. Some of them are imprisoned, and you can see in Big Oak and also in Sa Tsui. And so there are all these juvenile offenders, but sometimes we are worried about their protection because we're concerned with correctional services officers abusing these imprisoned juveniles. Does this bill also cover these juveniles, and how would it help them? In the past, some children who originally didn't have medical needs ended up requiring medical services. Should the doctors also report this to the SWT? And can it also help cover this part as well? Perhaps Dr. Cheung can give us more information. Dr. Cheung, thank you. The first question regarding juvenile offenders will not directly impact juveniles. I only introduced three categories of age groups, because no person under the age of 10 can be guilty of any offense. some juveniles and between the age of 10 and 16 cannot be found guilty of offenses except of serious personal violence. So I don't think that the number of these juveniles would be many. And then for those under the age of 18, they can only be charged summarily. So I don't think there would be any changes made. It's just that they should not be in prison for over 10 years if they're under the age of 18.
For those who have no medical needs but are still hospitalized, my bill may have some impact on them. As Ms. Pang mentioned a moment ago, if protection is provided for 9 months through the bill, but if there is still no review, then the court and the DSW will have that responsibility to review the case. We are aware that in previous cases, some children have remained in hospital for more than 9 months. If the DSW applies for a protection order, but the case is left in a hospital, even if there is no medical need, then according to this bill, the court must review the case after 9 months. And then I'm sure the court will come to a judgment to see whether that kind of treatment is still appropriate. So if there is a delay without progress affecting any case, then my bill will set a time limit of 9 months. Thank you. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Thank you, Chair. About child abuse, of course, we are very concerned. But very often, there is a communication problem, or actually it is a notification problem. If you say that child abuse has to be mandatorily reported, you include registered doctors and people who care for the child. And you are talking about reporting to the DSW or the police. I'd like to know whether this is going to be effective. How do these departments deal with such reports? As you said, Chairman, they would just treat it as a kind of notification without doing any follow-up. So reporting itself may not be very useful. I'd like to ask, well, we don't have the police here, but if the DSW receives such a report, how will you follow up? Because I'm more concerned about the effect of such a report. Thank you, members. I can supplement what Mr. Cheung said. The Ombudsman mentioned that there is a discrepancy in the wording between the guidelines issued by the Education Bureau and ourselves. However, we have already clarified that actually the wording is consistent. It is just that in our guideline, we are doing some amendments. We have to update the entire guideline before it is published again. However, because of some cases that have happened, the Education Bureau would like to issue a reminder to frontline teaching professionals. And that is, if a child abuse case is discovered, should they have to seek the consent of parents first before they can report it? We do have a consistent view with the Education Bureau. We say we would encourage notification to the parent, but it doesn't mean you have to seek the parent's consent. Because it is possible that the school will find it necessary to send a child to a hospital for examination, and of course there is no reason why you don't notify the parent. So you should notify the parent, but it doesn't mean that if the parent objects to such a move, the school will stop sending that child to hospital. This is how we interpret the wording. It is now the end of the year, and within this month, the SWD Multidisciplinary Child Abuse Guideline will be issued after amendment, and the wording will be consistent. We have explained that to the Ombudsman. Now, you mentioned inquiries and transfers and the difference between those. Is it that inquiries will be included? Yes, yes. But then in the amended version of the guideline, we will state clearly what is an inquiry, what is a transfer. Inquiry will be mainly about information, but transfer is transfer, meaning that if, for example, I'm a school and I refer or transfer the case to SWD, and that is a suspected child abuse case. Now, if it is a referral, then we have to do investigation. We will write this very clearly in the guideline. Even if it is an inquiry, if we should discover in the process that actually it is a child abuse case or a suspected child abuse case, we will not only set eyes on the nature of the case, which is an inquiry. Now, even if it is an inquiry to start with, if we see that follow-up is necessary, we will do it. And of course, the one making the inquiry may just want to seek information. And that case would remain an inquiry. And as I said, if a child abuse case has to be reported, you don't necessarily have to have the consent of the parent. At present, with regard to serious cases, we have provided more school social worker presence in primaries and secondary and even pre-primary settings, and we have seen more referrals as a result. If there are social workers who are inexperienced, when they refer cases to us, our colleagues concerned will actively investigate into cases together with that social worker to pin down the case, whether it is child abuse or whether there is any crisis. We may conduct multidisciplinary meetings, and we will consider the situation of the child to see whether the child has to be removed from the abusive environment in order to protect the child. We do this proactively. And also, regarding hospitals, if a child is left in a hospital for 9 months without medical need, certainly such is unacceptable. We have close liaison with the hospital authority. When the doctors discover such cases, they will liaise with our medical social workers and social worker following up on a particular case in order to arrange for the child to be discharged. If there are such cases, I'm sure we will seriously follow up. In fact, children over the age of 8 who commit a criminal offense are placed in a child's home, which is staffed by social workers. We provide probation and rehabilitation activities. They also attend classes so they can continue their studies. I believe our institutions are more for probationary rehabilitation. That's all I'd like to say for the moment. Thank you. Mr. Holden Chow. Thank you, Chair. I think Dr. Chang has spent a lot of time on this private bill. I'd like to ask a few questions. I can see that in a new provision, there is mention of the responsibility to report cases. You say you have to do that within a reasonably practicable time. But then there is a line saying that you have to also have regard for the best interests of the child, which is the only exception. I'd like to know more about what kind of best interests of the child are considered here. Secondly, the ban on corporal punishment. Well, I believe many parents are not applying the old ways of penalizing children. But in the provisions, it is said that if there is a beating of the child or punishment which does not last only for the short term. Now, I'd like to ask about this. Are you talking about very serious bodily punishment so that it is not a defense? But I can give you an example. Say, a parent may just hit the palm of a child, and it is not a very serious penalty, and there will not be the causing of long-term harm. Can that be a defense? Say if you just hit the palm of a child lightly, just once. Sorry, I have many such examples in my mind, so I'd like to seek some clarification. And number 3, about the Juvenile Offenders Ordinance. This bill particularly states that we have to have the presumption that juveniles under 16 should not be regarded as committing criminal offenses. But then I think 10 years ago, there is this presumption that children under 14 are regarded as not being able to commit rape. But about 7 years ago, the Law Reform Commission held a discussion saying that this is no longer appropriate because they were of the view that children under 14 were capable of the sex act and rape. So the LRC made a proposal which had been adopted by administration, and there was an amendment saying that children under 14 will now be regarded as having the ability to rape. And as in this bill, we are told that children between the age of 10 and 16 should not be considered of being capable of any criminal offense except an offense of serious personal violence. So would that go against what I mentioned just now? And what about children between the age of 14 and 16? And maybe we are not talking about serious violent offenses. Now, that child, for example, can be capable of committing criminal damage, for example. So how do these two tally? Sorry, I have used a lot of time. I'd just like to ask my question in detail. Who would you like to answer your questions? I think I'd like to listen to Dr. Cheung first because he is the proposer of the bill. Dr. Cheung, thank you, Mr. Chow, for your questions. Well, those are very reasonable questions about reporting. I definitely have said that in determining what is in the best interest of the child, well, I have said that if that is considered and a decision is made not to report a case, then indeed that is what I wrote. Now, what kind of cases do I have in mind? Meaning that a child has been abused, but then we don't make a report. In the end, it would be considered by the court if the case goes to the court. We believe that that shouldn't be the normal situation. Normally speaking, any child who is abused should be referred to the SWD or in serious cases to the police as soon as possible so that investigation can be conducted and so that the culprits can be penalized. But then in what situation will we consider the best interests of the child and not report the case?
一定諗到，不過
We do not know yet. However, if we are to report the case, would that bring physical harm to the child, or would that be life-threatening? Perhaps the abuser would further abuse the child. The child may not be under the guardianship of the SWD and has been returned to the abuser. And however, if you report it, then it might bring even more physical harm to the child. As for corporal punishment, if it is not a short-term or temporary punishment, then it would not be considered as abuse. Well, if it's only very mild and very trivial sort of corporal punishment, then it is all right. But then if you ask me what is meant by mild and very minor, then I would have to defer it to the legal sector. Well, my private bill suggested that for those persons who commit a serious personal violence, then they should be found guilty. And of course, that would include rape, because rape is an offense of serious personal violence. I don't think that is in conflict with what Mr. Holden Chow mentioned just now. Administration, would you like to respond? Thank you, Chairman. Well, for no person under the age of 10 and under the age of 16 being found guilty of any offense except an offense of serious personal violence, we look into whether the children understand that it would be a criminal offense for adults. We need to try to find a balance. Many teenagers may not be committing very serious offenses of personal violence, but it may be theft, fraud, brawls, and also criminal damage, and also the use of drugs. These young people, when they reach the age of 14 or 15, are not really considered as children. However, if they are coerced into crimes by telling them that they could get away with it because they are not of age, then there would actually be serious consequences for these youngsters. You see that we find many of these children in our reformatory school, and sometimes we think about whether this could be a sort of persuasion given by adults to coerce juveniles into committing serious crimes. We don't want to actually place a trap for young people. Thank you. Well, our time is pressing. I see that there are two members, Mr. Leung Chi-chung and Dr. K.K. Kwok, who would still like to ask questions. I'll have to draw a line there afterwards. Mr. Leung Chi-chung, thank you. Dr. Fernando Chung presented a private bill, and I think that it could be supported, especially with a mandatory reporting mechanism. In the past, you would only rely on volunteering reporting, but by making it mandatory, it could help prevent many tragedies. Well, I think that this is quite a good proposal. However, there are many factors we need to consider. The administration need to come up with clear guidelines for professionals in this sector to make sure that they would not be susceptible to this bill in their work. Otherwise, it would be very hard on these professionals. So I think that we must try to take it one step further. Many Western countries have already adopted it. I don't think it is too difficult if we are to take it one step further and to ensure that those in the sector would not find themselves being considered as criminals. Well, in the past, corporal punishment was not really considered as a crime, but then this could become an offense once this bill is passed. Let me give you an example. We punish our children by telling them to stand in the corner for an hour and making them apologize. Would that be considered a kind of corporal punishment? I think we all have different concepts on corporal punishment. This bill would become very important to families. Would you actually make it clear so that parents will understand it and ensure that the punishments given to their children would not be considered as a sort of crime? We want everyone to understand the concepts. Well, this is just my suggestion. It doesn't matter if Dr. Chung or the administration respond. Dr. Chung, would you like to respond? Well, it doesn't matter. Well, this is just my viewpoint. Perhaps Dr. Chung can speak about it. Thank you for your suggestion. Yes, this is reasonable. The reporting mechanism and the prohibition of corporal punishment would both bring negative impact if we overdo it. There's no punishment for the reporting mechanism right now to urge people to make a report as soon as possible. For corporal punishment, I said that if it's only a short time, very temporary and minor, then that would not be considered as a kind of abuse. Mr. Leung raised the issue of being put in the corner, standing for over an hour. I don't think that would bring a long-lasting impact, so that would not be considered as a crime. Ms. Pang, thank you. We always have to consider which cases need to be reported and which should be considered as child abuse. All your examples given by Dr. Cheung and Mr. Leung have occurred before. Sometimes we see only very minor cases. Maybe you only hit the child's hand once, or the child was made to stand in a corner for a while. We should not see these as child abuse. They're actually trying to manage their children. We should teach parents how to better manage and teach their children. Although it is not put under the Protection of Children and Juveniles Ordinance, what is considered as abuse, what is considered as corporal punishment, we have seen some very serious cases. I don't know if you remember a few years back, a father made his son run continuously for a few hours every few hours. He said that he was only doing the best for the child to make him healthier, but then it is a kind of abuse to the son, and we were able to successfully prosecute the father. We can use our current legislation to protect children. Last, Dr. K.K. Kwok, and then we will conclude this session. Thank you. I support the private bill proposed by Dr. Fernando Cheung. I also would like to ask about corporal punishment. Well, I hear from Ms. Pang that you are already treating such cases. We know the case of the father forcing his son to run around for a long period of time, but it might only be the tip of the iceberg. I think it is a starting point for us to prohibit parents to punish their children physically. Well, I don't want people to think of this lightly. Otherwise, it would not be a strong deterrent to parents. Because sometimes abuse is not only physical, it can also be mental. I would like to ask Dr. Cheung, because very recently we see in the social unrest that there are many persons under the age of 18 being arrested. And many of them have been physically hit by the police before and after the arrest, and some of them were even shot. Well, you might not have seen such serious cases before. because these are actually quite serious child abuse cases. And I have seen more than once that the police using their powers to send the youngsters to homes even though the parents have already objected to it.
有兩個問題。
Therefore, I have two questions. One, when we face such a difficult era, the administration is using police brutality to resolve political issues, and I think these cases will remain. Secondly, can we have another private member's bill to reduce such instances of affecting the rights of the child? Ms. Pang, you should look at cases that you are managing, because I have heard from Mr. Leung, and that has sent a chill down my spine. And in fact, there is no help, but the cases were made worse. I know many of your staff are also finding this unacceptable. Ms. Pang? Talking about the police applying for protection order and sending children to boys' homes because of recent social events, well, very often the cases would come in the middle of the night and they leave in the morning. I think it's because the children were waiting for their parents to bail them out or to accompany them to give a statement. I have seen many cases going to children's homes just for the children to take a rest. But in some cases, the children are being taken to court within 48 hours for a protection order. Now, we cannot comment on those cases because they are ruled upon by the court. But if there is any case where we think the child is harmed or attacked, no matter by whom, we will certainly follow up. Ms. Pang, I asked very specific questions. I asked about children under 18 who were seriously beaten up by the police. What kind of actual help can you give them apart from removing them from children's homes? What kind of other assistance can you give them? We haven't received such cases so far. I believe the parents can lodge a complaint with CAPO for follow-up, but our department has not received such cases. Thank you. Okay, so I thank you. I thank Dr. Chung and your team for working hard, because we all want to perfect the system or take another step forward. I think we have all spoken on the draft version of the bill. We will continue to follow up. Dr. Zheng, I'd like to thank you, Chair, and other members for your views. I think they are all very reasonable. As for the department, it has also given me an initial response. I have heard some concerns, but I believe what I have proposed doesn't run into conflict with the department's procedures. But as a bill being discussed at the panel, I find it a little regrettable that the Labor and Welfare Bureau is not represented, and not even the Security Bureau, the FEHD. They have not attended the meeting. Most of them are bureaus making policies. Of course, this bill is about policies, so I fail to understand why they did not attend. I hope this will be minuted. These are important legislative proposals, and yet we have yet to hear from the administration to have a more serious reply. The panel did our best to invite other representatives of the administration, but it is regrettable that they have not responded up till now. We certainly will record your view. Thank you. We'll go into the next item. Providing crisis support for sexual violence victims. We have a paper from the administration and another one from the Electrical Secretariat. So we invite the administration to come in and also the deputations. We have deputations and we thank them for coming to the panel in order to express their views on this issue. They have got submissions and also they will be addressing the members and also the administration to have an exchange with us. We thank them again. We have quite a team from the administration for this item. We have Undersecretary for Labour and Welfare, Mr. Casper Choi, Ms. Pang, Assistant Director, Social Welfare, Ms. Trista Lim, PAS for Food and Health, Dr. Chung Kin Lai, Director of Hospital Authority. We see that the deputations have come in. The Concerned Association for Violence Against Women and also from Tonghua Group of Hospitals, Seas Crisis Center. I'm sure you are very concerned about this issue. I'd like to remind deputations that we thank you, but your oral remarks are not covered or protected under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance Cap 385, so you have to take legal liability for your own remarks. But now let us ask the administration to introduce the paper from the administration first. Thank you, Chair. We are speaking on this item, providing crisis support for sexual violence victims, and we are happy to be here to have an exchange with you. The paper lists our work, and I'd like to emphasize the kinds of assistance we provide. Right now, we have a one-stop service model, and we have had it since 2007. We emphasize the people-oriented principle. Professional social workers will provide 24-hour outreach service to victims, and they will also coordinate and arrange continuous support and follow-up services, including cross-disciplinary support like medical care, forensics, examination, statement taking, emotional counseling, and service information, etc. According to experience of cases handled, victims who have gone through different ordeals may have different needs, and the services they need or the venues to provide the services will depend on the individual victims. But the objective of the one-stop service is to provide victims with the necessary services in a convenient, safe, private, and supportive environment in the company of and with coordination by social workers with a view to minimizing the necessity for victims, because members have also said that we should seek to reduce the necessity for victims to repeat accounts of their unpleasant experience. At the A&E Department of Public Hospitals, we have designated that 2 rooms should be provided at A&E. One is a designated room, the other one is a backup room, so that wherever possible, victims will just have to go to one place in order to receive all the relevant services. And also, the SWD and HA regularly review the arrangement of the designated rooms and the workflow and operation, and as well as conducting drill operations every year. Just September, we had one such drill operation. If I have time, I can share with you what we have reviewed. And in addition, we are aware that victims sometimes have different considerations about whether to report to the police. We have informed departments how we can coordinate better. The SWD will work with the police, legal aid department, and other departments in order to draw up guidelines for victims of sexual abuse. If I have time, I can go into that later with you. And that includes statement taking and also giving evidence in court. In the relevant ordinance, it says that if there are fearful victims or victims under 17, we can have a televised direct link, and also they can give evidence behind screens, etc. Last but not least, we will continue to step up training for frontline officers so that their ability and sensitivity can be enhanced. Perhaps I can give back the floor to members and we can answer questions. Thank you. On your team today, I understand that you also have Mr. Andy Kong, Senior Manager from the Hospital Authority. But now we'll listen to the deputations. First of all, Ms. Kanman Key from the Concerned Association for Violence Against Women. We believe this item is closely related to the FH Bureau and also the hospital authority. It's important for them to be here. In 2003, the WHO issued a guideline for medical legal care for victims of sexual violence. This is because sexual violence is a public health issue. And after sexual violence, and the victims will have to check for sexually transmitted disease and AIDS and other diseases. But then it is regrettable that the administration has always narrowed down this to a criminal issue instead of factoring in the needs of such victims into the provision of public health services. We have operated a crisis support center according to the WHO guideline. Victims can come to the center and in order to receive medical care, forensic examination, statement taking and others. And in 2018, in December, Dr. Pierre Chan moved a motion on such crisis support center, and these centers should be set up according to 4 major principles. The major was carried. So whether it is the service unit or the council, we are hoping that the policy will be pushed forward. And we request that there must be these facilities in a center. There must be a forensic examination room. And then there should be individual cubicles for changing clothes and taking showers. And then there must be an interview room for statement taking and counseling. All these must be rooms that are sound insulated and with doors. The UK and Wales set up such a center in 2018. And this is spearheaded by the police and medical authorities. And altogether there are 14. And now in Taiwan there are 6 hospitals with such a one-stop service. Hong Kong says it is an advanced place, but then we are lagging far behind in this field of providing support for sexual violence victims. Many of the victims are hugely disappointed. I would require the FH Bureau and also the hospital authority must respond. In 2018, December, you have already carried a motion. We'd like to ask you to give us a timetable for setting up a crisis support center, and which 3 public hospitals do you think such a center can be set up? And also in May this year, our association submitted a submission to you saying that there should be such a center in the Kai Tak Hospital to be implemented. I'd like to ask you to tell us whether it will indeed be implemented and why. Certainly, we can have better exchange when we ask questions. Next, we can ask Ms. Chung from the Cease Support Center from Tonghua Hospital to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. The Tonghua Group of Hospitals Cease Crisis Center was started in 2007 and has always been helping victims of sexual violence and those families to provide support services. Our center provides a one-stop support service for these victims. Other than outreach services, we would also accompany victims to the police and to follow up medical services and to provide individual or group counseling services. When these victims find that they are still susceptible of violence after they go home, then we will provide short-term accommodation for them to ensure that they feel safe. We have two views. We have in relation to the support of sex violence victims. First of all, the one-stop service provided by the SWD right now can provide immediate support services to victims. When the victims want to report it to the police or to other organizations, as long as they consent to, the case managers at the Cease Crisis Center will accompany them and to provide them with the suitable services and to ensure that they would not need to continue to go through the experiences again and to ensure that there will not be secondary trauma. Therefore, from our experience, we find that the earlier the support, the better it would for them to overcome these tragedies. According to police investigation arrangements right now, if the victims voluntarily go to their district police station, then they must first allow the police to set up an initial investigation to ensure that there is a case before handing it over to the district where the incident happened. The victims will have to continue to repeat their experiences, and that will bring further harm, and the victims become emotionally battered. Our center suggests that the police try to reduce the interview time and to be more empathetic to the victims and trying to provide better to their needs. After being sexually violated, victims will feel very unsafe and scared. A safe and comfortable environment can help victims go through all these medical procedures. Therefore, I believe that it would be much better if we can help the victims minimize their commuting time and to provide better services and care for them. Thank you. Thank you. So we have representatives from NGOs and the administration. We now open the floor for questions. I see many members have raised their hands. Chan Chi-chun, Lok Chong-tai, Lok Chong-hong, Poon Siu-ping, and Zhang Qiu-hong. Mr. Ray Chan, 4 minutes, please. Thank you, Chairman. Our topic today is to provide crisis support for sexual violence victims. But after reading the paper, I find that in recent months, members of the public are concerned with a sexual violence case that is not being dealt with today, which is the police sexually violating arrested persons. 30 people have already reported being sexually violated by the police, and 10 of them said that happened in police station, and 3 of them said that they engaged in sexual intercourse under force. The interviewee interviews found that very few people actually really report these cases because they're afraid that if they provide such information, they would be charged with unlawful assembly, attacking the police, and therefore they would just remain silent. Some reports also show that a young woman has been raped in a police station, and she has also gone through an abortion. These are some individual cases, but then we find that many people against the extradition bill are trying to remain silent. I just want to ask SWD colleagues, well, if there are such victims who have been sexually violated by the police and they come to you under the current mechanism, how can you help them? I think that we have to consider this. Well, in the 1960s, when you report the police taking briberies, we didn't have the ICAC back then. Would it work if you report against the police? Do we have to set up a sort of individual committee like the ICAC to handle cases about these sexually violated victims? Mr. Cho. Oh, thank you. Mr. Ray Chan mentioned certain cases. For all these sexually violated cases, then we would look into what kind of medical needs they have. We need to send them out the message that we support them, and in finding out the truth, and if you want to do that, of course you must first report the case to the police. I have to tell members that amongst the prosecution numbers, the success rate of prosecuting against rape cases are very high. And police need to follow very clear guidelines on the procedures. Well, all right, I need to interrupt. Well, if the victim does not want to report it to the police and the person only wants to seek help from NGOs, how can they do that? Well, I need to make sure and try to understand your point of view. Well, for NGOs' views, perhaps you could permit some time for them to explain what kind of services they could provide for such victims. And I can also ask Ms. Peng to make some supplement. No, it's not usual sexual violence cases. I'm talking about these cases, these specific cases. Oh, thank you for the question. We do not have a crisis support center right now. Therefore, the victims would only think of going to the police. I'm talking about needing a crisis support center because we're not only talking about medical services. Well, once there are these sexual violated cases, and particularly penetrating sexual acts, then they need to go through forensic examination and perhaps go through postcoital contraception. So these must be done within 72 hours. We want the victims to know what kind of services they receive and that they can also be accompanied along the way. We need a crisis support center because we want to send the message to the victims that they will be able to receive all these services and they don't exactly have to go to the police. Well, let's say they are not confident to report it to the police. Can you still provide such services? Yes. We have we also have the rain lily under our services. We don't make them call the police. We provide them with counseling services and medical services, and this is what we can guarantee to the victims. How about legally? Well, under the current legislature in Hong Kong, if you want to seek justice, then you must report it to the police. The NGOs emphasize on an alternative right now because we do hope that there will be independent investigation. Well, I'd like to thank these two associations, Association Concerning Sexual Violence Against Women and Tongwa Group of Hospitals, Cease Crisis Center, for submitting your views. There are a few points that I really like to follow up. For example, on the one-stop service and the setup of a crisis support center. Perhaps after we answer members' questions, we'll be able to ask the administration to provide us with more information on the step they can take further. Next, Mr. Tseng Chong Tai. Thank you. I'd like to follow up on Ray Chan's question. Not only on sexually violated victims being in fear of the police. When the general public has such low confidence in the police, how can the government help these victims seek social justice? It's not only they don't believe in the police. It's probably they are probably a victim of one specific policeman. Well, a few days ago, a woman arrested was sat on by a policewoman, and the policewoman sat on her head. If that was a male officer, then perhaps he would be charged with sexual abuse. I just want to hear from the two deputations. Let's say victims suffered from sexual violence whilst they were reporting to the police. Could the police really be charged? Well, since we are now talking about this, there are already some issues that have occurred before, and how can the administration handle it? I want to hear from the two deputations, please. Thank you. We have received calls for help by victims, but it doesn't matter whether it's current or before. We just try our best to provide them with the services needed. Some victims tell us they do not want to report it to the police. Well, we respect the wishes of the victims. We just try to follow with their wishes. Ms. Khan, do you have any supplement to make? Well, if I understand correctly, you're saying that the victims encounter problems while they were while they were making a case to the police. or let's say the victim wants to report on a certain police officer, would there be any difficulties in that, and what kind of improvements can be made to try to resolve charges against police officers? Well, if the abuser is a police officer, as Ray Chan said, they're not likely to report it to the police because they're not able to face this abuser. So this is actually a strong emotional obstacle. They will be afraid to go to the police. And very often we hear that, well, we do not have any representative from the Security Bureau here today, but then the police really are not sensitive about handling sexual violation cases.
We have always heard these myths, and the police will always advance these stories that your boyfriend will not rape you. He's your boyfriend. How would he rape you? And he would say that in such scenarios there is no possibility of sexual violence. So they're not sensitive. And very often, they will repeat asking the same question. There may be 7 to 8 policemen asking about the same thing. In other words, the victim will have to repeat the experience for 7, 8 times. So it means, did your husband rape you? Yes, exactly. And this is a very serious situation. In our data, over the last 10 odd years, over 44% of the victims do not prefer to report to the police. And in the 56% that have reported to the police, the investigation was terminated in 712 cases, and 200 of those were decided by the victim herself. And I'm talking about a total of 2,318 cases. As I said, police are not sensitive, so the victims are harmed again in the process. Mr. Michael, look. Thank you, Chair. Sexual violence is a very serious offense against the victim's body and mind, and we must not tolerate this, and we must provide all the support necessary, and we must be concerned about those who are victims. But then I can see that some members have talked about cases that have not been confirmed. I think they are chasing after the wind, so that our discussion here is not focused, and so that those who are really victims are not the subject of discussion here. I find this very regrettable. Anyone who is sexually violated, whether by police as claimed by some, and I believe some other professionals have been implicated as well, but I won't really name the professions. I think we should all report all these cases to the police. It's just like you were sexually violated by a certain profession, and yet you still have to report it. Therefore, I think the police include many people. Instead of saying that there will be collusion and connivance in the entire police force, we must have trust. We must have zero tolerance for sexual violence. Okay, I come back to my question. I don't know I have missed anything in the paper. It seems you are saying that your one-stop service is so perfect, but I'd like to know how much manpower are you going to increase, like social workers, in order to provide the service? Usually people go to a hospital to seek help. Is there a guideline as to within how much time the relevant professionals should reach the hospital? Because my understanding is that the social worker may not be resident in the hospital. So do you have a key performance indicator as to how many hours or within how many minutes the professionals have to reach the hospital in order to provide the one-stop service. I'd like to ask the Undersecretary. Thank you, Chair. On the one-stop service, recently, with regard to Dr. Pierre Chen's proposal earlier on, we did some study into this. Can I hand over to the hospital authority to let you know our work arrangements that have been decided recently? Yes, thank you for the question. On our present handling of the cases, as we stated in the paper, at any A&E department room, there is a guideline telling our staff what to do. And in 2007, we have amended the multi-departmental guideline, and also at the A&E department of the HA, we also have a guideline for our staff to provide support to victims, including investigation, examination of injury, and psychological support. If they need postcoital contraception or prevention of hepatitis 2 or AIDS and other kinds of support by social workers, etc., we do have a guideline on these. We do not have exact statistics about each case, but I have sought an understanding with my staff. Basically, when a victim comes in, we may have to call CEAS Crisis Center or Rain Lily. Basically, the service is provided within an hour. On the average, it is about half an hour. Social workers will arrive within half an hour. Our staff have said that that is very satisfactory, but sometimes the wait may be longer because we may need to have forensic pathologists to come along, and that can take longer. I think the department has not answered my question on manpower increase. You say you have new services. Anything from the Bureau or Ms. Pang? Thank you. Today we are here to introduce to you the operation of the one-stop service. As to increase in manpower, we are going to increase manpower to help EM, ethnic minority women, in order to enhance their awareness about domestic violence and encourage them to seek help. We will be doing that. Next, Mr. Shu Ka-chun, Deputy Chairman. Thank you, Chair. As we all know, we need interdepartmental cooperation to tackle these cases, including medical care, forensic examination, statement taking, emotional counseling, etc. Today we have LW Bureau, HA, SWD, and Food and Health Bureau. We thank you for coming. But I mind the absence of the police. This is unacceptable. The CEAS Center and Rain Lily have talked about secondary harm. Very often, this has to do with the reports to the police, the handling by the police, and the sensitivity or otherwise of the police. If they don't attend the meeting today, we cannot achieve the purpose of the paper of preventing the victims from undergoing secondary harm. I find the police's absence from this meeting very regrettable. Talking about the one-stop service, well, you call it one-stop service, all right, but I still think that the one-stop service named by the government is quite different from what the deputations and WHO are asking for. I'd like to ask Dr. Kong or Dr. Chung. You say that there are 18 A&E departments which are designating rooms. Now I'd like to know how many are there altogether. How many have O&G beds? How many have independent shower and changing facilities? How many protect the privacy of victims by having sound insulation and doors? Who would you like to answer the questions? The Bureau, please. Thank you for the question. First, I'd like to say that we agree that the one-stop service at the HA A&E departments, I agree that there is room for improvement. We should take another look. Right here, I do not have any statistics as to the special facilities at A&E rooms, but basically they have arranged 2 rooms to provide the service. If necessary, these rooms will be used for such services as a matter of priority. Basically, there is a certain degree of privacy because the rooms have a room. But not in all the places can we do gynecological examination right there. Sometimes the examination has to be undertaken in another room. I also like to say that, as Mr. Shiu said, how we can reduce the possibility of secondary harm. Well, I think the facilities in the rooms matter, but we have to look at the entire service to see what more can be done. I think there are many other elements that have to be considered. And I think we should adopt an open mind to try to improve the situation. Of course, as Rain Lily has asked us, the situation in A&E departments is such that service or space provision is very tight. In fact, we do not have enough provision of space. Sorry, Chairman. Well, your time is up, but I'd like the Bureau to give me a written reply on the number of beds. And also, even if it is not within A&E department, even if you don't have enough rooms at A&E department, maybe you can do it within the hospital at other places or outside the hospital. And maybe you can start with 3 hospitals as mentioned by one association. Will you do that? Is there a timetable for it? Bureau? Maybe I can take the question. As I was saying, the most important thing is to look at how many rooms we should have, what facilities there should be, and where they should be. But then you should have a coordinated approach. You should not require the victim to go from one A&E department to another. If it is centralized, it will be easier for you to provide the facilities and facilitate manpower transfer. But what is the mode for Hong Kong? We have an open mind. So should it be 1, 3, or 4, or 7? We will have to take another look. Chairman, the deputations are asking for the service to start at 3 hospitals. It makes no sense for you to mention 7 or 18. So you should start with 3. That is what they are asking. Okay, maybe you can ask again in the second round. Poon Xiuping. Thank you, Chairman, and the 2 associations for coming. The Bureau emphasizes the one-stop service, which includes medical care, forensic examination, statement taking, emotional counseling, social work support, service information, etc. I'd like to follow up on one issue. The deputations have asked that a crisis support center be started in 3 hospitals. Now, policy-wise, what is your response? Of course, this is different from your one-stop service model. But will you consider providing these centers as a policy direction? There are 18 A&E departments under the HA, where there are the rooms that have been designated. But as Dr. Chung said, you also admit that there is room for improvement. Actually, this year, the SWD and the HA conducted a drill operation this year. I'd like to ask about this. What are the improvements that you have identified after the drill operation and review? Did you involve other policy bureaus and even the Department of Health, the police, the legal aid department, etc.? Or did you just do it involving the 18 A&E departments and the SWD?
Well, can you tell us about what we have done so far and what are some of the new considerations? Thank you, Chairman. Well, the paper has already mentioned the one-stop service because we want to try to provide victims with the necessary assistance. We also provide them with an outreach service. Perhaps SWD colleagues and the HA can tell you more about the services. Thank you. In September, we invited all the departments and related organizations to participate in the simulated training. We have the Department of Health, police, and SWD, and HA, and also colleagues from the SEAS Crisis Center. We simulated a rape victim being sent to the A&E, and we went through each procedure very carefully. The different departments and the organizations observed it through CCTV, and then afterwards we did a post-briefing session. We thought that this was very good training because perhaps the NGOs may be more familiar because they've always been accompanying victims, but then the different departments would only be in contact with the victim for a certain period of time within a certain procedure, and how the victim feels throughout the whole procedure. Therefore, after this simulation, every department thought it very useful to help them better understand what other departments are doing, how they work together, and they were also more empathetic towards the victim. And thus, they will be able to help victims deal with their negative thoughts and to minimize the harm done to the victim. We understand that it's very painful for the victim to continue repeating the incident. I know the police has been looking into streamlining the procedure and to try to prevent or avoid repeating questions. We believe that this was very significant to our work. Thank you. Dr. Fernando Chung. Well, sexual violence differs from general violence, that other than physical harm, there's also very strong post-traumatic thoughts and emotions, and the victims find it difficult to recount their experiences. we want to minimize the necessity for victims to recount their unpleasant experiences. So we hope that the services could be an outreach service, and the victim will be able to go through all the services and support and forensic examination and statement taking in one place, and that would help victims tell about their experiences so that other people can help them. We understand that for many such cases, the victims refuse to recount their experiences. And even if they did, they would not report it to the police. And many of them do not even seek help. We have discussed previously that there should be a place at least for them to be assisted. Now, usually it's not in A&E. In other countries, it would be a certain place outside of the hospital. The government paper states that it is already providing one-stop service model. However, social workers are there to coordinate and accompany and to provide continuous support. This sort of one-stop service model goes against the general principles. You are just trying to euthanize, or you're just trying to tell us that it's a one-stop service, but then it's not. You probably haven't dealt with any crisis situation. Usually, the cases only come to light after a long period of time, and sometimes even after many years. The victims suffer not only physically, they are in mental anguish. And it seems like they are just reopening their wounds every time they talk about it. So sexual violence is different from general violence. Even if the victim comes to you 10 years later, it will still be fresh in the victim's mind. The HA has been allowing organizations to work on this all these years. It doesn't matter whether it's Rain Lily or C's Crisis Center. We do need some sort of coordination. And Dr. Chong is correct. It's not the issue of HA. As was mentioned, the police would ask the victim 6 to 7 times to go through the experience again. Oh, don't just do a drill. I don't think a drill is adequate. The social welfare really must try to provide a real one-stop service model. Ms. Pang, I'd like to use my discretion to extend the meeting for by 15 minutes. Ms. Pang, thank you. I'd like to address the one-stop service model. Dr. Chung is correct. Many cases do not have to go through all the procedures. because many calls of help come after a period of time. So they won't need forensic examination, they do not need medical assistance, and some are still unwilling to report it to the police. The social worker plays a very important role. Some victims might still need a medical examination because they're worried about sexually transmitted diseases. But they do not need to go to the A&E to handle the procedure. We hope to convenience the victim. We hope to convenience them if the victim wants to meet somewhere near her home or near her office. Then we are willing to meet the victim there. Our case manager will find a suitable place to provide counseling services. For new cases, victims have just been raped and need to go through all the forensic examination. When the person is in A&E, then we have our designated rooms in A&E to ensure that the victim can receive one-stop service. But if the victim does not need all these procedures, then we will try to accommodate her wishes. We are people-oriented. We want to convenience the victim as much as possible. Well, Ms. Peng said that some services may not be needed. But then right now we do not have a time or do not have a place to meet with the victim because there might not be a designated room available. The police usually do not agree to going to interview the victim in those designated rooms. The victim can only go to her district. And so that really cannot adhere with the one-stop service model. I'm sorry, we do not have much time left. Perhaps you can ask it on a separate occasion. Dr. Elizabeth Kwok. Well, I followed up on the services provided to sexually violated victims many years. I always think that the government does not attach huge importance to this problem, and they're not really not aware of the pain the victims go through. We have been trying to get screened interview in court and also safe passageways to ensure that the victims would not need to go through secondary harm. We have discussed this in LegCo for many years. In 2018, we moved a motion and it was unanimously carried. We are now following up on how or when the hospital will be able to arrange for one-stop service. And can the police also work together to ensure that the victim would not need to report the case in a police station? Well, the administration still cannot let us know when this could be done. Dr. Chong asked how many would be enough. Well, as many as possible. We would accept as many as you could provide. Don't tell us that you need to explore the most appropriate number. Wherever there is room, I think you should designate one. And the more room you have, then the more rooms you designate. Don't just tell us that you're exploring the best number. Now, that is very unreasonable. Can you perhaps first address this concern? Thank you. I know the HA has been following up with it, and the 18 public hospitals have already arranged for designated rooms, and many members have already suggested the streamlining of procedures to minimize the number of recounts the victim has to make. Perhaps the HA can also tell us more about it. Thank you, Dr. Kwok, for your question.
At the A&E department, as I said, space provision is tight, but we have a 10-year hospital building program. Some hospitals can be redeveloped, and their A&E departments may be refurbished or made larger. Does the center have to be at the A&E department? Actually, sometimes they are just close to a hospital, but not within the hospital. We have an open mind about this. Why do we have to review the number? It is because, well, it is good to centralize the office, but it is also good to decentralize the office. And this has everything to do with the entire process. As Dr. Fernando Zhang said, all in all, we like it to be people-oriented. We should avoid having the victim go to different places and repeating the experience. From a report in the UK, there sometimes needs to be repeated forensic examination. So we want to improve the situation and reduce secondary harm. This has to do with the service provision. Can I please say a few words more? Chairman, what we want to see is a written reply from you with a timetable as to where such a crisis support center will be provided, where and when, and what is your design option. We'd like to have an actual timetable, because a few months later you may come back and just repeat what you say, because the motion was carried here in Council a year ago, and now you are still telling us that you are considering it. And then we will have an end to the LegCo term, and we will have to follow up in the next term. Can you not give us a written reply? Because we have been asking questions, but the responses have always been the same. Okay, I hope you will give us a written reply. And now I need to process the motion to be moved by Mr. Xiu Ka-jun, because we have a quorum in the room now. Mr. Xiu, over to you. In view of the fact that the one-stop service provided by the administration to sexual violence victims still does not satisfy the proposal of the WHO, this panel urged the administration to come up with a reasonable timetable to set up 3 such centers in hospital A&E departments, complying with the principles of a comfortable environment, safety, a high degree of privacy, and also medical provisions. Can I please ask you to raise your hands if you support it? Unanimous. Thank you. Professor Joseph Lee. Is it that it has been passed? Well, our style at the WSP is to vote directly on the motion. You are not a member, but we thank you for coming to express your views. Professor Lee. Chairman, we have discussed this issue many times. The HA tells us that this one-stop service has been adopted for over 10 years because it started in 2007. You say there are 5 elements, including medical care, forensic examination, statement taking, emotional counseling, social work support. Can you give us figures to tell us what kind of services have been provided for how many times in the last 5 years? I only want figures for the last 5 years. Why? Because you say it is so useful, it is so good. But we have made so many comments and we have just carried a motion. So in fact, do victims know about it? How is this used? We used to dial 999, but now we dare not because the police may not be able to help us. But you have a 24-hour hotline operated by C's Crisis Center. It used to be provided by Rain Lily. But have you publicized your service so that the victims or potential victims know what numbers to dial? I can't see a flow chart in the paper either, because people have to know that if they dial a number, what kind of services they can expect. And if there is no publicity, then you will blame the hospital authority. But Dr. Chong, I'm not helping you. It is because you don't have a policy. And why do you leave it to the HA? And Dr. Chang and Mr. Shiu have said very clearly, what we need is a crisis support center, so the victim doesn't have to go to different places. But now you're just asking a social worker to accompany the victim to go different places. And sometimes a victim has to wait 5 hours before she sees the police, and the police would repeatedly ask the same questions. So how can you reassure victims that they can trust you and use your service? All that is unclear. It's no use for you to paint a rosy picture in the paper. Right now, supposing, like Dr. Zhang said, you may comply with the international standard later. Is it that still the victim has to go everywhere? Or is it that the hospital, the social workers, the SWD and the police will proactively go to a place when they receive a call? Will the forensic pathologists will go there, the social workers will go there to provide emotional counseling? This is what Dr. Zhang is asking, but this is not what is happening. What is your response? Under secretary, it's not for you to make a decision, but your secretary only knows about barbecuing. Please be empathetic. If, say, for example, a victim calls up Prince of Wales Hospital, does it mean that a team of professionals will line up to help them? Undersecretary. Chairman. On support services. Of course, we have certain figures, but I don't have all the figures. But the member asked about the hotline. In 2018, 2019, I think the C Center received over 800 calls. No, Undersecretary. I'm asking whether people know about the hotline. I did not ask about the usage of the hotline. Now go back and listen to the tape again if you did not listen to me clearly. Now I wanted to point out the figure because I wanted to show that people were using it. And the center is here today. I know you have done a lot of publicity. So victims of sexual violence know how to contact you. If you don't want to listen to me, perhaps. Chairman, I think he is provocative. I think he should be here to listen to my questions. You should not be provocative. We still have 7 minutes. Do you want me to provoke you? Well, I seldom see Professor Joseph Lee so angry. I think there was overlapping of voices. Undersecretary, I was trying my best to answer questions, but he interrupted me, so I did not have time to answer you. Please give me the time to answer you. If he needs figures, we can supply them later so as not to waste time. But members asked about publicity. Perhaps the service center can answer. Okay, maybe the deputation can speak up. On the crisis hotline, 18281, we send hard copies to relevant service units, and we publicize ourselves on certain websites, so it's easy to search for us. But we, of course, also provide information cards at hospitals. And we also have a team that works with the police, and we also provide support at report rooms in hospitals. If people need to use the hotline, Well, I can tell you that the hotline is really busy. And when necessary, we'll immediately send a team once we receive a call. We don't require the victim to come to our center or any particular place. They can dictate the place and we will go there to provide service. Thank you. Chairman, I'd just like to say one word. I'm not actually trying to ask about the service of the NGO and to comment on it. But the thing is, the administration says they are providing excellent one-stop service, but then you are passing the buck to others. I'm talking about whether you operate a hotline. You should not just rely on the NGO. They cannot produce APIs, but you can. You have an API on love and violence. But why don't you produce APIs so people know what hotline to dial to get one-stop service instead of passing the buck to others? Well said, Undersecretary. Well, we definitely don't pass the buck to others. We cooperate. We need to have multidisciplinary and multi-departmental cooperation. Ms. Pang, on SWD website, we publicized the hotline of the NGO, and recently we know that there is mention of sexual violence on the internet because of the social unrest. So we have added a Google banner on certain apps and also social media to publicize the hotline. So we remind victims of sexual violence to call that hotline for help. Thank you. Professor Lee, I know you are very anxious about this issue, but please follow up the issue on other occasions. I will ask my questions, and then I hope the administration will address the two submissions. We thank the NGOs for their support, and I know that we passed a motion last year. I don't know whether I have heard you completely. As we said in the motion, would you like to respond on the timetable of setting up the crisis support centers, and also which 3 hospitals will you identify? And then I know that an NGO submitted a paper to the HA in May this year, saying that there should be such a center in the new Kai-Tak Hospital. Have you reserved space for this? And what is most important is that we are discussing the concept today only. Should the crisis support center be a multi-function room, or should it also protect privacy, etc.? Well, my team have handled many sexual violence cases. I think the first hour would be most important. The victim should know where to go. If it is just any other room and tell the victim to come and give her a glass of water, that is not a crisis support center. I hope the Bureau can reply again. What is the concept of a crisis support center? And maybe the department can let us know about the operation. Can you give us some concrete information? Undersecretary. Well, I think we have answered some of the questions. I think that has something to do with planning at the HA. I can defer to the HA. Thank you, Chair. We agree that we should improve the service. At this moment, I cannot tell you exactly which hospitals will be the one to set up these centers, but we know that it has to be people-oriented. And this is also important for our staff. If the staff do not have the incentive or the training or support in order to support the center will not function well. So we will take this back to the committee, and we are going to identify 3 to 4 A&E departments. So their staff can discuss how to provide the service, and we may give them resources to do training, maybe even overseas, to see how different models can be carried out. Sometimes we read reports, but as to how we can work together and cooperate, I think we have to look into the details. What about the Kai Tak Hospital?
Because this is actually a newly launched hospital, would there be room provision for that? Or Kai Tak is a new hospital. We are expanding. We're expanding it and also expanding other old hospitals such as Kwang Hua and Tuen Mun hospitals. These new spaces could allow us opportunities to better develop our service. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I need to seek your consent to further extend the meeting so that we can ask the administration to give us more in-depth responses. Oh, thank you. Well, we provide a suggestion. Perhaps you can tell us whether you have a sort of overall response. Well, we have seen that we do need a cross-disciplinary cooperation, and everyone has pointed out the main goal, which is to help minimize the necessity for victims to repeat accounts of their unpleasant experiences. The one-stop service and drill can really help the different departments understand what is meant by people-oriented, to look at it from another perspective, to see how we can stop inflicting secondary harm to the victims. We are going to arrange for designated rooms under the HA hospitals. And in future, in our new planning, we will also look into streamlining the process and identifying suitable places. We want the victims to feel safe and to be supported through the services. Individual members have requested the truth be found, but we need to respect the wishes of the victims. We should try our best to enhance our support, and I specifically mentioned in the statement taking that those under 17 or those who are mentally incapacitated could have their statements taken through video taking. There are some myths that we also need to resolve and to enhance the sensitivity of the departments. In the past, we have enhanced support after statement taking. For example, the victims could arrange to attend court behind screens. and to go through special passageways. Because many victims do not seek help immediately. Therefore, we need to provide them with the accurate information and support. Through promotion, we are going to enhance our line of work. Thank you. I'd like the NGOs to respond, and I know also Dr. Fernando Chang would also like to speak. I would like to mention that we have arranged for a visit to the Rain Lily and to the hospital. We are really very serious about this topic. In the next couple of weeks, we are going to arrange for the visit, and I hope that all members will be able to join us on this visit. I'm sorry, time is really pressing. Perhaps both NGOs can speak for 1 to 2 minutes. Ms. Khan, please. Thank you. Well, I'd like to give a short response. Optimizing the multi-purpose room from our perspective is not very realistic and practical, because the A&E room is not a suitable location because there are too many people going around, and over 60% of our cases really cannot use that room. It's not the most ideal situation. The A&E is not within our consideration at all. Secondly, right now it is considered a multi-purpose room. It is actually just a room, so anybody can do whatsoever in that room. So how can there be specific facilities for sexually violent victims? Upgrading the multi-purpose room cannot improve the service at all. And thirdly, Ms. Pang also said that some victims do delay reporting. Therefore, they do not need such services when they come to us. So many victims or come to us after a few months or sometimes even a year. They didn't come earlier because they didn't know where they could seek assistance, or they didn't want to come. They didn't know where to go because there is no specific service set for these victims. And very often they would just go and buy contraception pills at the dispensary. Or when they go to A&E, they didn't know to tell hospital staff that they have been raped. And there's a myth that they feel forced to call the police. We want them to feel safe. Or is the service right now really people-oriented? I think this is what everybody has seen, that it is really not considered for their perspective. So this is my short response. So I don't think that we should waste time in enhancing or upgrading the multi-purpose room. I think we should really try to see whether we could provide better service to the victims. Ms. Chong, do you have any response? Thank you, Chairman. I'm really sorry. Although we know that there is such a facility in the HA hospitals, we have never really successfully completed all our procedures in this one-stop service room at all. Can these facilities really provide such a service? I think you should perhaps consider more carefully how you can better plan the room. I think we should look into streamlining the procedures for victims. It would be of great help. Some cases would only be referred to us after the statement taking and forensic examination. I believe that if we refer to them at an earlier stage, and that victims understood that they could be accompanied by us or social workers, I'm sure that it would be a much better support to them. Can we really have everything completed within one location? I think we also need to work together professionally. Even having the best services will not be effective if no one is willing to use it. Thank you. Dr. Fernando Chung, you have one more question. Well, I just have a simple suggestion. I think Ms. Chong has been very precise, because not one case has had all procedures completed in the one-stop service room. So it's not significant to renovate the room, because if forensic doctors are not willing to come, police are not willing to come, then it's of no use at all. Or I don't think Mr. Choi can handle all this. I suggest the panel send a letter to the CS and request him to concern himself with this topic. We need the CS to lead the way for our policy, and then to really develop a people-oriented approach to really set up a true one-stop service support for sexually violent victims. Oh, thank you. I'm sure the Secretariat will help us to draft the letter. Mr. Choi, do you have any other response? If not, then I will once again say that we are going for a visit very soon, within the next couple of weeks, and I hope that everyone will join. I'd like to thank NGOs for their hard work. We hope that through changes will be able to do more in the future. There is no other business. I adjourn the meeting now.